Hello and welcome to the Roy Rogers News Channel. Thank you so much for watching. And for today's fun-filled ability video, where we're going to be talking about a certain Pokemon that can help you out in terms of preventing wild alpha Pokemon from using any sort of status move. And what is that ability, you might ask? That's a good question. It is Klutz. And with me here to discuss this ability is a certain burger that I picked up from a PokeMMO fast food joint. Jacoburger! So I'd say hello to everybody.
What's going on, guys? You might know me from Secret Shiny Audis video, if you've seen that. It's floating around YouTube, I know. People recognize me from that a lot, so make sure to check it out.
Excellent. Alright, and maybe you can link that video to me when you're done with this, so I can link it down in the description below, because I want to give that video some attention.
Sounds good.
Excellent. Alright, and for today's ability video, we're going to be discussing Klutz. And let's go and discuss the definition of Klutz. So what is Klutz, you might be asking, and that's a good question. Klutz basically makes it to where the Pokemon cannot use any held items. Why is that good? Well, let's just say that you have Toxic Orb or Flame Orb and that sort of thing, and then the Pokemon has Move Trick or Switcheroo. You can basically allow for your opposing Pokemon to get those damaging held items, and then you can be able to hurt the Pokemon that you're opposing. So that's pretty good. And Jacoburger, do you have any commentary to say about Klutz?
Yeah, so things like tricking Flame Orb onto Alpha can help, especially if it attacks with physical attack, because being burnt will half damage, and also helps with your catch rate.
And with that, I think we are ready to dive into the ability video. So Jacoburger, are you ready to dive into the Pokemon?
Oh yeah.
And I would like to give a brief prerequisite here by saying this. And my apologies for the lawnmower there. I heard it in one of my recordings. If you hear the lawnmower, please don't write me. There are a lot of people mowing their lawn, and Jacoburger looks like one giant grass patch. So I know some people are going to have that in mind. So there we go. So let's go and talk about the prerequisite, shall we? So one of the things I would like to discuss is this. I don't plan on discussing the pre-evolutions. That's because I don't want to waste your time. Because when you get the Klutz ability, you really want to have the maximum evolution. You don't want to say, oh, I want Baneri because it looks cute. No. If you want cute stuff, then you can get Shiny Baneri, you can go around Vermilion, do whatever you want. But this is not the video for you. The video that we're doing here is Klutz, and we're going to make sure that you get the best Pokemon for the ability. So that's why we're going to discuss the maximum evolutions to be able to thrive in your catching abilities for the wild alpha Pokemon. And with that, let's go ahead and dive into our first alpha Pokemon to feature, shall we? Let's go and start off with Lopunny. What are the advantages of Lopunny? And that's a good question. Look at that speed stat, 105. That's pretty fast. And you're going to outspeed a fair amount of stuff on PokeMMO. And also another main perk is this. Lopunny also has a pretty decent attack stat at base 76, especially if you're dealing with wild Pokemon. So that's pretty good. You can go ahead and equip Lopunny with certain damaging moves. For example, you can teach Lopunny Elemental Punches, you can teach it Drain Punch, you can teach it so many things here. Turn, you can even teach it Endeavor if you want. There's so many moves you can teach it. Substitute. But in my opinion, there's a Pokemon that's much better for this job than Lopunny, but I would say that Lopunny is certainly a runner-up due to the fact that Lopunny is fast and you can be able to go in and out in terms of your wild encounters. I would say Lopunny is actually pretty good. And now we gotta talk about those drawbacks. So let me go and start off with the fact that if you are dealing with a Pokemon with a very harmful ability, I'm thinking about Rough Skin Garchomp, for example, then Lopunny might give you some problems. Why? Because Lopunny can only learn entrainment. Now, as a result of Lopunny learning entrainment, guess what that means? That means that the wild Pokemon also gets Klutz. Why is that bad? Because if I'm doing a switcheroo on an item, you know what that means? That means I want for the wild Pokemon to be affected by the item. And the wild Pokemon getting Klutz, that essentially means that the item's effects become not valid. Now, of note, I know that there are things like Toxic Orb and Flame Orb that only need to be affected once, and that's good, especially for the Klutz ability, because all you need is just one turn for the wild alpha to hold that Toxic Orb or Flame Orb. But if you want to work with things like Assault Gear or with Lagging Tail, then that's going to be a bit of a problem. And yes, you can work with things like Spinda, and you can be able to do the skill swap, and you can give the wild Pokemon Contrary. And yes, you can use the Ball Trick, which essentially means that the stat decreases on the wild Pokemon. The attack, special attack, and speed But then, I've been through this rodeo before, the chances of that wild Pokemon having all those stat decreases turn to stat increases can go up as well. So you got to be careful of that, and that is why I don't really like to use Lopunny's entrainment move. I'd much rather use the next Pokemon's moves, but I can get to the next Pokemon a little later. Also, another main drawback for Lopunny is this. Let's say Lopunny gets burned or poisoned or something. Lopunny cannot give that status to the wild Pokemon, right? So as a result of that, Lopunny is forced to deal with being burned or poisoned or paralyzed. Now, maybe you might say, Roy, I don't want the wild Pokemon to be burned, poisoned, or paralyzed. Okay, yeah, that's your prerogative, but wouldn't it be great to have that option to allow for the wild alpha Pokemon to be burned, paralyzed, or poisoned without you having to suffer through it? I don't know, that's just something I prefer. Here's another drawback for you. Switcheroo is an egg move. Now, even though, yes, Lopunny is a fielded humanoid egg group, and Field is a cheap egg group to breed for, you need to budget a Switcheroo Pokemon in the mix. And there are certain Pokemon that can learn Switcheroo. Most notably, you have Persian, which is at the start, meaning that you're going to have to go over to the move remember and use those heart scales. Or you can get a Hypno, same thing. Hypno's a little bit more expensive than Persian. And you have to go to the move remember because Hypno also learns Switcheroo via the move remember, or you need to breed it with Linoon, and Linoon also gets Switcheroo, but again, you have to go to the move remember because you need to relearn Switcheroo since Switcheroo is a beginning move for Linoon. You might say, Roy, why is that bad? Because when you breed a Persian, Hypno, or Linoon, then you're going to get either a Meowth, Drowsy, or Zigzagoon as a starting Pokemon, and those Pokemon don't have access to Switcheroo. The only Pokemon that have access to Switcheroo are Persian, Hypno, and Linoon, so you gotta waste 2 heart skills from the get-go, where you can use Smeargle to sketch, but that's too much work. And Jacoburger, do you have any commentary to say about our bunny friend?
Yeah, so a couple things I noticed from looking at the moveset is that it does have U-turn and entrainment. So U-turn is really nice because you can get that little bit of chip damage if you need to switch out of Lopunny to your Spinda, for example. Entrainment kind of functions as a simple beam. I mean, not the best by any means, but it would be able to switch your Alpha's ability.
Yes, that is true, but I have a question though. When you have the move Switcheroo and Entrainment, they don't really go together, do they? Because when you use Switcheroo, you're trying to get rid of the item. And then what you're essentially doing is that when you do Entrainment for the next turn, you're essentially making that wild Pokemon immune to the item, right?
This is true. This is counterintuitive, now that I think about it.
So...
But it's an option for the moveset. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I
Maybe
mean,
not the best option.
Look, it can work if you have something like Flame Orb or Toxic Orb, because all you need is just that to activate once.
That one turn.
Yeah. So it could work, but only for orbs. Doesn't work for things like Assault Vest, which we can get to a little later, but it does work for Flame Orb or Toxic Orb, which basically only need one turn to take effect. That's our opinion about Lopunny. Lopunny, I would probably say, is something that you can consider, but not really something we really encourage you to do. Alrighty folks, we are done with the bunny, and now we're going to dive into the next Pokemon, and the next Pokemon is a certain friendly bat that you can meet in a cave. What is it? It is Swoobat. Now before we go into the graphic, I would like to show you the summary here. So here's the nature here. Jolly, plus speed, minus special attack, and I'll get to why that's important a little later. And then the item being held is Assault Cure. So the gist of the item is that it doesn't allow for the Pokemon to use any sort of status move, like Will-O-Wisp and the like. So that's important. And that's why I like to have Swoobat holding this, so that way it can use Trick. I'll get to that in a moment. The IVs, this is more of a flex. You don't need to be 5x31, but here are the IVs that are important. So 31 HP, 31 attack, 25 plus defense, 25 plus special defense, and then 31 speed. And then for the EVs, there you are. 200 to 2 HP, 200 to 2 speed, and then 6 attack. And then for the movesets, here it is. So you have Trick there, and then you have Acrobatics. So the reason why for Acrobatics is because when you trick off Assault Gear, guess what? That means that Swoobat has no item. And what that means that Acrobatics can hit harder because you can be able to use that move, which is pretty nice. Simple Beam, because you're able to change the ability there. And Psycho Shift, which means that you could be able to transfer a burn or poison over to your opponent. So In case your opponent has a Will-O-Wisp or something like that, you can go ahead and get rid of that on Swoobat. So, perfect. And without further ado, let's go ahead and go into the graphics, shall we? I might be asking, hey Roy, how come you're advising me to use Swoobat? And that's a good question. Look at its egg group. It is Field and Flying. Field is a cheap egg group to make there, so that's one of the reasons. And also, let me go ahead and mention this right off the bat. Psycho Shift is an egg move, so if you want the Swoobat to learn Psycho Shift, you can either sketch Smeargle, which I would say is a lot of effort, or you can breed it with a Hoot Hoot, once Hoot Hoot is at level 15, because level 15 Hoot Hoot can learn Psycho Shift, or Noctowl, but then you have to relearn Psycho Shift, or you can breed with a Natu at level 26, and you can be able to breed with an Exatu if the Exatu is level 28. So those are the bird Pokemon you want to breed this Swoobat with, and you could be able to have a Psycho Shift Swoobat right off the bat there. Another benefit to Swoobat is the fact that it can learn Super Fang, meaning that it could be able to cut the Alpha's health in half. So that's pretty cool. Jacoburger, would you like to make a commentary about Super Fang on Swoobat?
Super Fang is just really good. I mean, it makes whittling down the Alpha's health a lot easier. I mean, you don't have to spend forever false swiping with your Breloom or whatever it is you have. It just speeds up the process.
Now you might be wondering, hey Roy, how come you have Acrobatics over Super Fang? And that's a good question. That is due to me wanting to have an answer against ghost types, because there are a fair amount of alpha ghost types out there. I mean, you have Sableye and you have Bayonet that might have a status move. I'm thinking about Will-O-Wisp and the like. And I want to be able to have an answer to those ghost types, right? So I can go ahead and trick that Assault Vest on there. And then I can be able to use Psycho Shift so that way the ghost type can get burned. And then I can be able to try to catch the ghost type from there. But I just want to have the option to be able to hit that ghost type with Acrobatics rather than having to predict the ghost type coming in and then switching Swoobat out, and then I don't have an option there, right? So that's why I don't have Super Fang on the Swoobat, though. I have Super Fang probably on something else, but not Swoobat. But I would say that Super Fang would be a good option, and you could probably replace Psycho Shift if you're not into switching status. I just like the idea of switching status, but if you're not into that, then feel free to replace Psycho Shift with Super Fang. And Super Fang is a TM, so you don't have to worry about bringing it on. Let me go ahead and discuss some more perks. Swoobat's speed stat is actually higher than Lopunny at base 114. You could be able to outspeed a fair amount of Pokemon, so that's pretty cool. And as I mentioned in the introduction, not only does Swoobat have an excellent speed stat of 114, but also you have access to tricks. You know what that means? That means you can be able to give your wild alpha Pokemon the Assault Gear. So what does that mean? That means the wild alpha Pokemon cannot use any sort of status moves. I'm looking at you, Sableye. And also, you have access to Simple Beam. You know why that's good? Because you can be able to transform that Pokemon's ability from a damaging ability, like Garchomp's Rough Skin, into a simple ability, meaning that if you go into your catcher, you can be able to use False Swipe without worrying for your catcher's safety, because your catcher doesn't have to worry about, oh man, I'm getting damaged every time I'm using False Swipe. And you also have Psycho Shift. And the reason why Psycho Shift is so good is because you could be able to swap out a burn or something like that. So you could be able to give the wild alpha Pokemon the status. In case you get burned or paralyzed or something like that, you could be able to just toss that over to the wild alpha Pokemon, and now the alpha Pokemon has to deal with the medicine that tried to feed you. So that's pretty awesome. Or if you're not worried about switching over the status ailment, then you can always run Super Fang over Psycho Shift, and you have the benefit of the fact that Super Fang is a TM and not an egg move for Swoobat. So why Acrobatics? And that's a good question. As I mentioned in the introduction, since you don't have an item, Acrobatics does more damage when the Pokemon's not holding an item. And that's why I have the Jolly Nature, so that way I don't touch the attack stat, and then Swoobat can casually chip off the wild alpha Pokemon's health, since wild alpha Pokemon tend to be a bit more bulky than the average Pokemon, from my experience at least. But now let's go and talk about its weaknesses, shall we? As you may know, Swoobat's not perfect. Swoobat doesn't have access to things like False Swipe. It doesn't have access to Yawn. It doesn't have access to several things. And as a result of that, you still have to bring your catcher. You still have to bring a fair amount of supplies. But I'm going to say this. Don't be deterred from making a Swoobat just because I mentioned this very fact. Swoobat is the best Klutz Pokemon. Spoiler alert there. For the rankings, for anybody staying tuned for that, about the Pokemon catching. I would say Swoobat's attack stat is the lowest out of all the Klutz Pokemon featured here at base 57. But again, don't be deterred because Swoobat's really good at its job. Plus, it's Psychic Flying. So since it's Psychic Flying, that means that Flying Stab can be able to help you out in terms of your acrobatics. So you can be able to get that extra damage output because of Stab. I would like to mention another drawback, and it would be the fact that Woobat evolves into Swoobat via Max Happiness, and that might be a little bit of a pain. But if you feed Woobat enough berries, then it should be able to level up, and then it can be able to evolve into Swoobat. There's a little bit of some work there in terms of evolving Woobat into Swoobat. Jacoburger, do you have any feedback to say about our lovely bat with the heart nose?
Yeah, so Swoobat is just really good in general, just because it has such a wide selection of moves. Like, it just has a lot of status moves. It's just super good in just almost every aspect except for attack. Also, like you said, I think it's got the best speed out of any of these that are featured. It's the fastest one.
Alrighty folks, I am done discussing our friendly bat, so now let's go ahead and discuss another Klutz Pokemon. What is it? It is a Chansey ripoff, also known as Audino. Now you might be wondering, hey Roy and Jacob, what are the main perks to Audino? That's a good question. Look at that HP stat. It is an awesome 103. It can be able to take several hits. Also, another main perk to Audino is this. It has access to Simple Beam, so that means you can be able to turn any Pokemon's ability into Simple when you use the move. Or you can have access to Entrainment, meaning that you can also give the Pokemon the Klutz ability as well. Also, another main perk for Audino is this. Audino has a fair amount of healing moves. I mean, Swoobat also has access to healing moves too, but I would say that Audino is kind of known for helping heal Pokemon, so that's certainly something that's very good for Audino. And another perk for Audino is this. Due to an egg move, it can be able to learn Yawn, and you can be able to teach Audino that via a Pikachu if you have enough battle points, Raichu if you have enough battle points, Togetic if you're at level 20, or Togekiss from the start. So that means you gotta go to the move relearner and you gotta learn on via move relearner. And then as for Wish, well then you could be able to learn Wish via Togetic at level 52, and then you can breed it to Audino, or you'll be able to evolve Togetic into Togekiss and you can be able to get Wish from the start, and then you can be able to breed it on Audino. So if you want both Yawn and Wish, then you can be able to raise a Togetic or Togekiss in order to get that. I hate to say this, but I gotta discuss the disadvantages with Audino and why Audino's not really the best here. That speed stat is pretty pathetic at base 50. You're not gonna outspeed a fair amount of things, and yes, even though you can take several hits, at the same time, I'd rather have Audino be faster and be able to get the job done rather than just taking several hits and hoping that I can be able to catch the alpha. Another main drawback is this. Since Audino is Fairy Egg Group, I mean, your breeding options are pretty narrowed down. So you can't really have much flexibility in terms of being able to breed with this one or breed with that one. Lopunny and Swoobat have the Field Egg Group, so at least they're cheap enough to breed up, implying that you get the egg move for Lopunny or you get the egg move for Swoobat. Audino is a different story. Audino, not only do you have 2 egg moves which are gated away, but also you have an egg group that people don't tend to hunt for too commonly. So trying to get the Fairy Egg Group Pokemon for Audino is going to be a little bit of work here. And I would like to mention another drawback here. Audino doesn't have Trick. It doesn't have Switcheroo. So that means if you want to give a Pokemon a damaging item, you can't. So Audino's a beautiful looking decoration there, but it's not really going to do much for you in terms of being able to give your opponent a damaging item. Not only does Audino not have access to the move Trick or Switcheroo, but also Audino doesn't have access to Psycho Shift. And why is that bad? Because let's just say that your opponent decides to burn you or decides to poison you or paralyze you. You cannot retaliate. You don't have an option to give your opponent the status ailment. You are instead forced to suffer with that. And as a result, Audino really gets the short end of the stick. Oh yeah, and also the fact that it's a hidden ability. On top of all the problems that Audino has to deal with, the fact that the Klutz ability is hidden, you know what that means? That means you have to budget around breeding on Audino. And keep in mind that hidden ability Pokemon are typically more expensive to breed for than Pokemon without hidden ability, that means that you're going to have to budget around breeding the Audino. Now, I would say that the hidden ability itself is not really worth your time for the Audinos. So I'm just throwing that all out there. Jacoburger, do you have any commentary to say about our Chansey ripoff friend?
Yeah, so I think Audino is pretty interesting just because it has such a wide selection of moves. I think one thing that could possibly be interesting is Encore move that it gets. I could lock the alpha into one move, perhaps a less damaging move, and then take advantage of your defenses on Audino. But other than that, I think everything I was going to say has been covered.
Right. I do want to mention something about Encore, though, because I know that some people are probably going to mention that. When you have a base speed stat of 50, realistically, you can't really pull that off so easily, because there are a fair amount of alphas that might outspeed that base speed stat of 50. So,
That's definitely true.
yes, I would say that Audino might not be the best Pokemon for this particular job.
Yeah, probably not. It's definitely an interesting Pokemon. I mean, it has so many different niches, I guess, but it is just that. It's niche. It's not really the best at anything besides being super tanky.
At that, I'm going to go ahead and move on because I don't want to see a pink blob crying. So let's go ahead and dive into the very last Pokemon of this video. And what is it? It is Golurk. And you might be asking, hey Roy, so what are the main perks of Golurk? Well, besides being able to use it in Elite Four teams, here's another advantage. So the fact that Golurk has an awesome base attack stat of 124, you could be able to hit a fair amount of things very hard. Here's another thing that I would like to mention about Golurk. Its defense and special defense are actually pretty decent at base 80, and then HP stat is base 89. If only the typing is not the way it is. I'll get to that later. But for now, I'd like to talk more about its perks. So the good news is that Golurk does have access to Trick, meaning that you can be able to switch items and be able to use it to catch certain alphas. Only use it on electric types. Don't use it on anything else. And even then, be careful what electric types you use Golurk on, because there might be some electric types that could learn a move that Golurk cannot handle so easily. I'm thinking about electric types like Future Alpha Lantern, for example. Future Alpha Lantern might have a water type move that the Golurk might not appreciate, but I'll get to that later. Here's another advantage. Golurk has access to an excellent array of physical moves, most notably all the elemental punches, Earthquake, Shadow Punch, Drain Punch, Heavy Slam, etc. Really, the sky is the limit. Oh yeah, and speaking about the sky, Golurk can also learn Fly, so just in case you need an HM slave, there you go. Golurk can be your makeshift HM slave, and you can be able to learn Fly with Golurk. So, there we go. And now I gotta talk about its cons. Okay, I gotta start off with the fact that it's genderless egg group. You know what that means? Go.
I know what it means.
Yeah.
It's pretty tricky to breed up, that's for sure.
Correct. You have to breed that Golurk with either Oletz or fellow Golurk. And that's going to be very expensive because Golurk is a very niche breed and not everybody is really looking for a Golurk unless you're doing Elite Four run. So Golurk has quite an uphill battle for itself in order to make it really good for PvE. Oh yeah, when I say PvE, I don't mean fighting with the Elite Four. Elite Four, it's actually just fine, but I'm talking about alpha encounters. Alpha encounters, Golurk just doesn't really serve that well in that department. Here's why. So Golurk does not have access to any sort of sleeping move. It doesn't have access to any sort of good PvE move. Oh yeah, did I mention the fact that not only does it have a pretty lackluster PvE moveset, I'd like to mention another drawback about it too. Do you remember how I keep mentioning about the ground and ghost typing being not that great? Alright, ghost typing is pretty good. Ground is not, especially for a PvE Pokemon, because there are so many weaknesses that Golurk opens itself up to. I mean, you're talking about water type, you're talking about several types that can just take advantage of that ground type. I'm talking about ice type moves. There's so many things that Golurk just cannot wall that well. Even though, yes, Golurk does have access to Safeguard, I mean, I could say the same thing about Swoobat, and I could say the same thing about Audino. And also, when you're dealing with an alpha fight, you really want to go fast. You don't want to be doing like this maneuver, that maneuver, and that sort of thing. So you really have to coordinate really well, and you don't want to waste your time when you're fighting an alpha. So I just want to note that. And The rest of the moveset, I would say that you're just grasping for straws for Golurk. So that's my opinion about Golurk. I would like to mention one more con as well, and it'd be the fact that Golurk's base speed stat is 55, which is not really optimal to use against wild Pokemon, because wild Pokemon are going to run circles around your base speed stat. And Jacoburger, do you have any statement to make about a certain Statue of Liberty inspiration Pokemon?
Yeah, so like was mentioned, extremely weak typing. I mean, it's got 5 2x weaknesses, but at the same time, it does have 3 immunities too. Can't be hit by normal, electric, or fighting moves, which is pretty interesting. That could be useful for some alphas, but I think that this is just definitely the weakest option on the list as far as Klutz goes.
So I'd say in the end, just let Golurk do Elite Four fights. Don't let Golurk go outside of that, because the moment that you let Golurk go out of that realm, then at that point, Golurk then starts to become bad. So don't let Golurk become bad. Let it be in the Elite Four fights and let it perform there. Or you can even use it in NU, so feel free to use it in NU as time of this taping, and you can probably be impressed with its performance. Alright, Jacoburger, it's time for us to discuss the rankings. Are you ready?
Yes.
Excellent. Alright, let's go and dive into the rankings right now. So the number 1 Pokemon that I have is Swoobat. Because Swoobat has so many maneuvers you can do. You can do Trick, you can do Simple Beam, you can do Super Fang, and you can be able to do Psycho Shift. So that's pretty awesome. And also, you're able to let Swoobat hold Assault Gear, you can let it hold Toxic Orb, Flame Orb, etc. You are not limited to what damaging item Swoobat can hold, because you don't need to worry about entrainment. So that's certainly something that's very awesome. I mentioned Trick, I mentioned Psycho Shift, but also with Simple Beam, you can be able to change that wild alpha Pokemon's ability from something damaging to a simple ability. So that means it's easy for your catcher loves you, and you can be able to use acrobatics to chip away from that damage, right? And also I'd like to talk about Super Fang as well, and I talked about this previously when I discussed Swoobat, but basically what Super Fang does is that it cuts the HP in half for the alpha Pokemon, so it makes it much easier to catch the alpha Pokemon if you want to add Super Fang. I'll say that Swoobat's moveset is pretty well rounded, and I would encourage people to make a Swoobat, because Swoobat is just that good. As for the number 2 Pokemon, and this is a solid number 2, this is not like a close running up to Swoobat, but this is more like a close number 2, honorable mention, but I'm going to mention it. Lopunny. And the reason why I say Lopunny is because, as Jacoburger has said in the Lopunny section, the Lopunny has access to both entrainment and it has access to the move Switcheroo. And even though, yes, Switcheroo is an egg move, entrainment is not. That's pretty awesome, and you could be able to use either Flame Orb or Toxic Orb, but you can't use things like Assault Vest and that sort of thing, because the Flame Orb and Toxic Orb only need 1 turn to activate, so that's something you might want to consider there. Now, as for number 3 was a really hard decision. I had to pick between Golurk or Audino. Jacoburger, I'm sure you're having a hard time deciding this too, right?
I think one is more a clear option than the other, off the top of my head.
Yeah, were you going with Audino?
Yeah, I think Audino is just better in general. Like, it just has a wider selection of moves, very tanky. You can use it for a lot more than a Golurk.
Yeah, Golurk is really good in the Elite Four realm, but it's not really good outside of that.
It really just doesn't seem to have a niche in alpha catching. It's just super weak, pretty lackluster overall.
Well, in all fairness, Audino is also lackluster too, but less so.
For sure. Yeah.
It's another case of the reason why I put Masharna number 3 in the telepathy video. The reason why Masharna was number 3 was because the other options were terrible, and Masharna was the less terrible option. This is the same logic behind Audino. Audino is less terrible, but it's still terrible.
I think it really benefits just being a regenerator Pokemon for PvP, and that's about it. I don't think it's even very popular in PvP.
Although if you were to use it in PvP, you might want to use it in NU, because NU, you have a lot weaker Pokemon. I'll just say for Audino, just let Audino be in PvP and just let Golurk do its Elite Four reruns. Jacoburger, do you have any commentary to say about Swoobat or Lopunny?
Yeah, I think you ranked those accurately, to be honest with you. Swoobat just has so many different capabilities. You can change it to whatever you need for whatever alpha, and then Lopunny's a close runner-up. Definitely agree.
With that, that's going to go ahead and conclude our program. And before we go, I know that Jacoburger, he wants his Kabutops to be linked here. So here you go. There it is. Thank you so much, Jacoburger, for letting me hold on to Kabutops for the program.
For sure.
Excellent. All right. So there's Adamant, There are the IVs. Wow, 5x31. Must have been quite expensive making that.
It wasn't too bad comparatively to most shinies. Water Sea is pretty cheap, but definitely still cost a pretty penny.
Yeah, and also the gear station. Remember, you told me something like you wanted to make a commentary about that, so...
Yeah, the gear station is like just my home, you know? It's super lucky there. I've always bred up my expensive or like my more, I guess you could say my cooler shinies always are bred up there. I actually rolled one of the 31s for that final breed. It was the lowest it possibly could have been was a 30, but lo and behold, I had the 5x, so that's pretty cool, and it's just very lucky for me. So,
wow. Well, congratulations, man. And oh yeah, I did want to say this, that that Leech Life move really does match your costume really well because of the green. It really does.
Yeah.
Yeah. So congratulations on that. And you know what? And for ethical reasons, just like what I did with the guy with Suicune, I'm going to go ahead and trade this back to you. So, can you give me a Pokemon? There we go.
There you go.
Thanks. There we go. So I have my Aeron back. And Jacoburger, thank you so much for being on the program.
Of course. Happy to be here.
Excellent. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign off for now. This is the Roy Rogers News Channel. Don't forget to comment and subscribe to the channel, like and comment Daisy here. And this is the Roy Rogers News Channel signing off. Fast, accurate, biased, Roy Rogers News.